Welcome to Making Life Magical. I'm your host, Lori Hammond, and we are so stinking lucky to get to eavesdrop on this fascinating conversation with Paul Langfield. Paul is a licensed marriage and family therapist with over 30 years of experience. He is passionate about providing solution-focused therapy and has a background in addictions counseling, traumatic brain injury treatment of functional neurological disorder, and other psychosomatic illnesses, as well as executive leadership coaching. Paul also guides clients through ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, which lends to an intriguing discussion during this podcast. And he is an executive leadership coach. I have experienced hypnosis with more amazing hypnotists than I can count. And when Paul hypnotized me, I thought, oh, this is what those people who cluck like chickens and bark like dogs feel like on stage, because I felt like the part of me that usually resists forward momentum and action that used to feel impossible was unlocked and loosed and freed. Paul is the kind of therapist who actually guides people to healing and helps them realize, I am okay. I can move forward and live a rich, beautiful life. He interweaves the power of hypnotic language patterns to turn on the client's inner healing and generate true transformation. Paul's gentle approach empowers clients by unlocking their internal answers in a way that promotes deep healing through their own insights, with the professional guidance that flows from Paul's decades of experience working with the unconscious or subconscious mind. And let me just say, if you doubt that there is a part of you that knows how to guide you to the place that is even cooler than what you can currently imagine, then you were meant to hear this episode. I used to feel that way too. Paul is my hypnotherapist, and after my first session with him, I realized he's doing something different, something that is actually going to change my life for the better, instead of just marinating in my problems and leaving me feeling worse instead of better, which had happened in appointments with dozens of therapists I've seen over the past 30 years. Paul is a husband, a father of 5 grown children, and a renowned public speaker. He enjoys scuba diving, painting, and designing and building electric guitars. When Paul and I recorded this episode, we knew that many people who listen are also hypnotists. If you're not a hypnotist, you're still going to be fascinated by the beginning of this podcast, because Paul talks about how to create the kind of hypnosis audios that generate deep, rapid transformation. The second half of this podcast dives into the fascinating subject of ketamine-assisted psychotherapy and how it can generate more transformation in a single session than many people experience during years of traditional therapy. Enjoy the heck out of this wide-ranging conversation with Paul Langfield, and be sure to listen to the end, because Paul has created an amazing above and beyond gift that lets you create magical hypnosis audios for your clients or yourself. Paul, I am so grateful to see you today and to have this conversation with you. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. And to be honest, when I decided that I was going to start a new podcast, you were the first guest that I had in mind. So thank you for being here today. And I'm just going to jump right in and let the audience know that the reason I am aware of how effective your tools are is because I have been seeing you for coaching. I say coaching because I've seen multiple therapists my entire life. I've probably seen therapists for 30 years off and on. And most of them, if not all of them, made me feel more broken when I left, made me feel more hopeless, and made me feel more discouraged. I shouldn't say made me feel. That's how I left feeling. And
Right.
it's the opposite with you, where each time I leave your office, I feel more hopeful and energized, and I feel more equipped with tools to move forward. I'm going to stop talking and leave that there so you can say whatever you would like to say at this point.
First off, thank you for this opportunity. This is a great opportunity, and I love to just speak and teach. So we can let this go wherever it goes. But also, thank you for your kind words. As you know, um, just personally, I feel honored to work with all of my clients, and I say that very genuinely. It's everyone has their own journey, and for me, there's something very sacred about being along on someone's journey with them, and so it feels like an honor to me. So I appreciate that.
Paul, you and I have been at Hypnothoughts, the biggest hypnosis conference in the world. We've been together there, I think, twice. And this most recent time, I was unable to go, but you were able to go, and you had a 30-minute presentation that you were hoping would be a longer presentation. I'm gonna let you tell us what that presentation was about, because I think my audience will be really intrigued. There are a lot of people who listen to this podcast who are hypnotists already, so I think a lot of them would be intrigued to know what that topic was. So I'll just let you jump in.
So the way I do hypnotherapy and have from the start, it kind of comes out of my split brain. I'm a technical guy. I have a degree in computer information systems. I spent some time in technology in the business world. From the time I was 6 until I was about 18, I did musical theater and I did a lot of technical theater. I actually went to CSU on a technical theater scholarship. So being around mixers and sound mixers and light machines, all kind of stuff has always been part of me. And performance has always been part. And so when I started doing hypnosis, I learned about binaural beats. And I don't know if your audience is familiar with binaural beats or if you want me to kind of talk a little bit about
Yeah,
that.
why don't you just give us a bird's eye view of what that means?
Sure, sure. So we can measure where someone's state is, their brain state or their consciousness state electrically. The brain is both a chemical and electrical engine. So we know that when people are awake and alert, we can measure a certain brain frequency. When they're a little bit quieter but awake, it's a different brain frequency. When they're in hypnosis, it's a specific brain frequency. When they're asleep, a different brain frequency. And when they're unconscious, a different brain frequency. So in the 70s, some brilliant person discovered that if you take a steady sound, like the sound of a fan or a river, and you introduce it to both ears in headphones, and then you offset the frequency of one of those ears, your brain tends to settle in the frequency difference between the two. So if I send 200 hertz to this ear and 210 hertz to this ear, your brain will tend to settle at 10 hertz, the difference between the two. Okay.
Okay.
So back in 1991, maybe I created on my computer, I created my first binaural beats. And what I did is they started in an alert state. And then slowly over time, I adjusted them so that they went down into a hypnotic state. And then every now and then I would spike back up and back down again, which gives the unconscious mind a chance to do a handoff to the conscious mind. Because as you know, in trance, people, they go down and then they kind of waver in there a little bit. So I started back then using headphones and microphones to do hypnosis. So the person would sit in the chair, I'd put headphones on them, I'd pump in binaural beats, and then I would do the hypnotic induction at the same time that I was bringing the binaural beats down. Right.
Wow. Hearing you explain this makes things click into place for why I have experienced such a deep trance when you have guided me through hypnosis.
And then I thought, as long as I'm running my voice through a mixer and everything anyway, I might as well be recording this. So back then we had cassette tapes. So I had a little tape recorder and I'd hit record and I'd do the session. And then afterwards I'd pop the tape out and I'd give it to my client and they'd go home with it so that they could listen to it for reinforcement. And then when they came back the next week, I'd flip it over and I'd do the B side. And then they'd come back and I'd flip it over and record over the A side. I just do that. So I always had at least 2 recordings. At the time, I knew that there was an equivalent to not just auditory, because if people know NLP, right, you got the different senses. So binaural beats are auditory, but there's also a visual equivalent. And at the time, I knew that you ought to be able to introduce certain frequencies of light for the person as well that would also coordinate with the binaural beats, and that would also enhance trance, but nothing was invented at that time to do that. And I thought about inventing myself, but I had a lot going on at that point in my life, very busy. So I never did, but since then, that technology, actually, it's right here, has been invented. These are called, if you can see them, you've seen these, but these are Gansfield glasses. They just look like little sunglasses, but in the inside, there are little different colored lights that are flashing. And so clients can put these on and they put them on with their eyes closed, but the colors come through your eyelids. And so these are synchronized also with binaural beats. So now when someone comes in, they sit in my hypnosis chair. And I always use the term hypnosis chair, right? Anchoring NLP. So they sit in the hypnosis chair, they put on the glasses, they put on the headphones, and then I play binaural beats and also isochronic tones. which is another, it's similar to binaural beats, but it doesn't require stereo. And that came about just because I had a client at one point who was deaf in one ear. I thought, okay, well, there's got to be something else out there. So I did some more research. I came across isochronic tones. So my clients hear binaural beats and isochronic tones and music, and then my voice, and then they have the glasses on, and all of those escort them down into a deep trance.
I'm happy that I asked you to explain binaural beats because I have a real surface level understanding, but I feel like I understand it a lot better and why they're so effective now.
Yeah.
Where would have you gone next in your presentation had you been able to give that?
So I probably would have talked about kind of the combination of all of these things and how they all come together to enhance the trance.
Okay.
Um, and I think I don't need to be as formal here, so I'll just kind of talk around it if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
There are a lot of things that this also allows you to do if you set your system up like this. So all you need really is a mixer, which I can talk to people about what mixers work well and stuff. Mine is all computerized, but you need a mixer that you can mix in the sounds and the binaural beats and the music and your voice, and then you have 100% control. Like, for instance, if you imagine sitting in the hypnosis chair, putting on the glasses and seeing the lights, putting on the headphones, and then I use active noise canceling headphones, so that cancels out anything else in the room other than my voice and the music. And when you hear my voice, you hear my voice not out here somewhere, but you hear it in your head, right? So all of those things become anchors from an NLP perspective, which is part of this whole thing. So after 1 or 2 sessions, client comes in, I say, sit in the hypnosis chair. They sit in the hypnosis chair. They put on the glasses. They put on the headphones. They hear the exact same music. They hear the binaural beats. They're already heading into a trance because that all has been anchored. And also, since I can control my voice, if you think about embedded commands, I'm assuming your audience knows somewhat of this stuff, but let me talk a little bit about embedded commands, right? So when you might say a long sentence, and right in the middle of the sentence is a command, and you offset that command by turning your head, by changing your tone of voice, by lowering or raising your voice. There's certain ways you can offset that command so that it sounds like just a regular sentence, but the command is built into it. So most therapists or most hypnotists will do that with tone of voice, or they'll do that with a pause. You might say, and the unconscious mind, your unconscious mind, continues to relax as I speak. So I just gave you the command, you are unconscious, right? The unconscious mind, your unconscious mind continues. So people will do that with a pause like I just did, which can be somewhat obvious. And it also can be boring because you're using the same way to mark it out every time. But if you can imagine, I've got my mixer in front of me with a balance knob. I can move my voice anywhere I want. So I can very easily say, the unconscious mind, your unconscious mind, continues to relax as I blah, blah, blah. So I can now embed commands really easily. I can embed commands with reverb. I can embed commands with location in the stereo field. So it becomes very flexible to me.
I'm imagining someone who is listening thinking that feels overwhelming. You had mentioned that you tend to be a kind of a techie person, and some people in this field are tech challenged, not all of us, but some of us. So at some point, can you just talk a little bit about how you do this without creating overwhelm? Because I know you're fully present in those hypnosis sessions.
Yeah, I mean, some of it comes from practice. You have to get comfortable with the equipment and stuff. But again, you can do this. I do this with a very sophisticated digital mixer. When I started, I had a little thing that was this big. It had 3 knobs on it, up and down, and it had inputs and outputs, and it was very simple. Here's your voice, here's the music, here's the binaural beats. So it doesn't have to be complex. Mine is complex because I'm a geek, but it doesn't have to be, number one.
Could a person record the music track and put the binaural beats in there so they just had one track to play in the background? Okay.
That's the way I used to do it. In fact, what I used to do, I also use sometimes subauditory affirmations. So we know from science that in the 80s, there was the big thing about, oh, there's all this subliminal stuff and reverse masking on records, and on you watched your Coke commercial and it has all these images. We know that subliminal does not work. If your ear can't hear it, your ear can't hear it. And if your ear can't hear it, it's not effective. However, there is something called subauditory. With subauditory, I can record affirmations. You're getting more and more relaxed with each breath. Anything you would say hypnotically that would help someone get into a deeper trance. You can record that at a very, very quiet level so that if you put headphones on and you listened, you could hear it. Then you take something like the binaural beats, which is like a river sound or a hissing sound, and you lay it on top of that. Now you can't consciously make out the voice, but you can hear that, and your unconscious mind can hear that. So I also do subauditory messages. And you were saying, what if you record the binaural beats and the music together? I used to record all of it together. I had a recording that had the subauditory stuff, then I had the binaural beats, then I had the music. All I had to do was hit play, and I knew that was taking care of itself. Then all I did was just my normal hypnosis, and I had a balance knob where I could go left, right, and that was kind of it.
Okay, and the left, right is for the embedded commands.
Embedded commands.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, this is awesome. I'll be quiet and let you continue.
So I want to take you one more level kind of deeper into the rabbit hole. A lot of your listeners are probably also familiar with not embedded commands, but embedded stories, or there's another name for them, and I'm not thinking of it. Anyway, you start a story about Joe.
Nested
and
loop.
Joe's nested loop, right? So I do nested loops in my hypnosis, but I also, and what they do is they tend to trigger amnesia. When you do a nested loop, they forget the middle part of it. They remember the ends. And so the middle part, you can put really important stuff in there that if you have a really conscious client who's really cognitive, as soon as they leave the session, they're going to undo all the work you did. You do the nested loop, and then they don't remember the middle. I can do that with sound. I mean, I do that with my hypnosis anyway, but with sound, when I first start, I have my music in the background starts, and then about 6 minutes in, it slowly crossfades into a different music. It's similar, but it's different. So you go into the trance. About the time you're getting into that deep trance, and I'm starting whatever metaphor I'm doing, the music shifts a little. Also, during that time when I'm doing my induction, I'm taking my voice from just being flat like it is right here, and I'm slowly adding in reverb. So not enough reverb that someone would notice, but enough to give kind of an airy feel, which is nice aesthetically, but it also creates for nested loop, because then toward the end, as I'm getting ready for my exduction, I start to bring my reverb back out, and then I mix in the original music so that you end up with bookends of music and reverb. So that creates that nested loop, and it's completely content free.
Whoa, that's so cool.
Yeah, it works great, as you know.
In our most recent hypnosis session, were you doing something strange with the mic at the start? Because it had the sound of being at, and I was going to ask you about this afterwards and forgot, of like being at a big concert and you can hear the microphone and so I didn't know if you were doing something or if that was my brain doing something.
No, it's funny. So I was doing something, but not intentionally.
Oh,
I had
okay.
right before you, I had done a ketamine-assisted psychotherapy session. And for ketamine sessions, I have the person lay in the chair, and a lot of times they don't wear headphones because for some people it feels claustrophobic with ketamine. And so I have speakers on either side of the chair, with the hypnosis chair, and I was playing through the speakers. And so when I started your session, I was thinking, wow, this sounds really reverby, like you said, like at a concert or something. I realized it was the speaker was still on. And so that was coming through the mic and making it even more. So I reached over and I shut the speaker off.
It was really cool. It was an awesome effect. I'm happy it happened.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. And you can do anything. Again, once you have a mixer, it does all that stuff for you. And I have all my reverb and everything preset. So it's not like I'm doing all this complex stuff. I do the same thing every time. It's just a matter of turn the reverb up, turn the reverb down,
Yeah. So if someone listening is interested in incorporating this into their hypnosis practice and giving their clients this resource, I have two questions. And the first one is, can you just tell me the most bare bones way a person can start, and I think we've kind of already discussed that, but if you could like spell it out for me and anyone who might be tech challenged. And then the second question is, so many people who are listening right now likely don't do a whole lot of in-person sessions. They likely do a lot of their sessions over Zoom, and that puts the glasses idea, it makes it obsolete. Do you think this is something that would be useful for hypnosis recordings that a person gives someone? And do you think it's is there still a tremendous benefit without the glasses?
Yes. So I'm glad you asked that, because the other thing that's great is since your mixer and everything goes through your computer, when I do a teletherapy session, it's the exact same sound that's going to their headphones. So they don't have the glasses, but remember, the glasses didn't even exist until maybe 5 years, 6 years ago. I spent 25 years doing it without glasses, and I like the impact. The other thing is there's an aesthetic element to this that I'll come back to. But I have lots of clients who I've done hypnotherapy with. I'm licensed in Texas and Florida and Colorado. So I have clients in different states, many of which I've never met in person, but I have them put their headphones on and they get the exact same thing as they would in my office, other than the glasses.
Okay. And then if you would tell me just the most bare, like a person who is intrigued by starting but is overwhelmed by the information, what's a bare bones way a person could start?
I want people to learn this because I think it's extremely effective. So if you have listeners who want information, give them my information. They can contact me. I'll talk to them about, what they can do to put together. I'll tell them, here, go to Amazon and buy this and buy this and buy that.
Okay.
But to answer your question, you probably could use like AirPods or something, but this is just a head worn mic, right? So it's right here, and I can set up my mixer so that it's only picking up what's right here. So if there's other things in the room, it doesn't hear them. It's very directional. So a head worn mic works great. And then you can get a basic mixer. And again, if you want to have ocean sounds and river sounds and birds and all that, which is another thing I'll come back to on the aesthetic part, right? If you want to have all that, then you need a mixer with more things. But if you just want to mix in your voice and a pre-recorded thing that has the music and the binaural beats all together, you need something with two knobs. Here's my microphone, here's my music and binaural beats, and it can be that simple. So the other thing, in addition to the aesthetics, is that as long as it's all being mixed and either sent through teletherapy or live, I can also just record that. And to me, it's a great gift for your clients because everybody loves receiving gifts. And the way I do it, I'm not worried about copyright and I'm not worried about selling it. It's not my thing. So I just give it as a gift to people. And then we know with hypnosis how important reinforcement is. And so they listen to it over and over again. And I'll tell you just a real quick story. So I was working at just this morning, I met with a client who she has a 4-day-old baby. And she, a year or so ago, when she first came to me, she came to me for anxiety. And her anxiety is through the roof. And some people who really get anxiety, it's serious. She was afraid of everything. A lot of it was medical stuff. And she's in Florida, so I didn't do ketamine therapy with her, and I didn't ever do an in-person therapy, but we did a lot of hypnotherapy. And I would send her the recordings. And as she got close to this birthing situation, that would be really, really scary. That would have been terrifying for her in the past. And she actually decided to do a home birth with no medication, fully natural birth. And her parents said, "You're crazy, that's horrible." And she actually had the self-esteem and the confidence to say to her parents, "No, this is my decision and I've researched this." And so we did hypnosis and we did several recordings that she could listen to in advance about really getting in touch with her baby while the baby was growing and all of those wonderful things. And then when it came time for she went into labor, we had a session which she had to cancel. And so she canceled the session because she was in labor. And I said, "You know what? Let me record her a recording." So I recorded her a recording as if we were doing a live session, and I sent it to her. And she listened to that 3 times as she was going through labor. And your mom, right? There's times when her husband was super supportive, and other people were super supportive, but she's like, leave me alone, get out. And she would get people out, and she would put her headphones and she'd listen to the hypnotherapy. So for her, it was an incredible gift. And I give all my clients recordings, so people have a library of custom made for them hypnotherapy sessions.
Yeah. And that's even a visual reminder of the value. It's like an anchor to the value of you. Cause I've come away with those thumb drives, and I downloaded immediately into Google Drive, but I've opened my backpack and said, oh, there's that thumb drive. And it's like just this feeling of um deep gratitude. And oh yeah, I'm getting better. That like the things are improving in my life because of this. So it's a beautiful just visual anchor as well.
Yeah, yeah. Like I said, we talked before about the anchors. It's time for hypnotherapy. They hand me their thumb drive. They get in the hypnosis chair. They put the headphones on. They put the glass. I mean, that's all anchors.
Oh, I'm so excited. I just recorded a hypnosis audio this morning for my weekly hypnosis group, and I'm my wheels are spinning with ways I'm going to up my effectiveness. Paul, maybe what I would love to do is create some kind of maybe like an informational PDF, maybe an infographic type thing that people can download. And you and I can talk about the details of that. I can even put it together if you want to give me some ideas of how to do it.
Yeah.
I will also give them your contact information. And
Okay.
this is something I can edit out later. But if at some point you would like to do a training, like a Zoom training,
Yeah.
and I'll get people there to where you can do Q&A and set things up and equip people with this,
I'd
that's
love it.
an option as well. So,
Yeah. And I'll send you, so for hypno thoughts, I put together on my flip chart 3 or 4 pages, then I took photos of them. I'll just send you the
oh,
photos, because those could turn into handouts, or they could turn into a slideshow or something.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. Awesome. Is there anything else? Well, you said you were going to talk about the aesthetic, both with the glasses and with the birds chirping, and so I would love to hear
Yeah.
more about that.
So I do a lot of work with anxiety, depression, PTSD, and addictions. So I was a certified addictions counselor. I've been working with trauma and PTSD, for 30 years. And when someone comes to me, and by the way, since COVID, it used to be my clients would come in and maybe some of them were anxious and some of them were depressed. Now it's almost a given, right? My clients walk in and there's some element of anxiety or depression that's almost a given with a lot of my clients these days. Like they come in for this, but they're also depressed and anxious, right? So when you look at hypnosis, I like to think of it as both a science and an art, right? We know the science around it, but it's also an art, which is, I guess, where my performance piece came out with all of this. And I tell clients, I could hypnotize you standing up in a bar, but there's benefit to clients learning how to regulate their own nervous system. And clients with anxiety, they come in and they're in fight or flight mode nonstop. I do a lot of work with people with functional neurological disorder and postural orthostatic tachycardia. Those are physical medical syndromes that really come from psychological basis. And my hypothesis about those is that people live in fight or flight or near fight or flight 24/7, and our bodies were never made to do that. And so, like with functional neurological disorder, people come in, there's usually a triggering event, and they're having seizures. They can't walk. A lot of times they have to quit their jobs because they can't function. And it is not an epileptic seizure, it is a psychosomatic, which does not mean it's not real, right? So I have these people come in and they can't walk and they can't go to school or can't work. And I do hypnotherapy with them, and I just work on bringing that down. To teach them how to do that themselves is critical. So I do a lot of self-hypnosis type training. But getting back to the aesthetic, I could hypnotize you standing in a bar. Great, but there's so much benefit to people learning how to do that. So when I have a client come in with anxiety, clients walk out of my sessions, and I can't tell you how many times I've heard clients say, I feel like I just got out of an hour massage. And that's what we want. So you come in and your eyes and your ears and everything is surrounded, and you go into this place, this deep hypnotic trance. And then when they come out, they've had an experience. And of course, you can anchor that with NLP, but they've had this really relaxing experience. I think that in and of itself is hugely beneficial. So when I'm talking about aesthetics, it's not just, gee, this is cool. It really is, this is all encompassing. This really takes me to a different place where I can relax.
And I have to say, because I think it will benefit the listener, that there's also something to the fact that I, and I'm sure your other clients, feel very safe in your presence. I've been seeing you for a little while, but there have been times when I'll be in that hypnosis chair and I am experiencing a plethora of emotion that feels, I don't even always feel safe feeling it when I'm alone, and feeling it with you feels safe. And so I just want to say to anyone listening, everything Paul is saying is so beautiful and valid. And there's so many cool aha moments. And I also want you to be aware of how important it is that you just are a safe space for your client. Is there anything you can say about that that would help someone with that mission, should they choose to accept it?
It's all about the relationship, right? And that is where everything starts. And when I first was certified in NLP, which was back in 1992, I actually was certified by Connie Ray and Steve Andreas, who were the proteges of Bandler and Grinder. And so it was so exciting to be in that world at that time because it was new and evolving. But anyway, when I was first certified back then, I can remember thinking when they were talking about rapport building, like, wow, this feels really sort of fake. Okay, so they're going to cross their legs, so I'm going to cross my leg, and they're going to do like this, so I'm going to do this. And that's awesome, but it doesn't take the place of true empathy. And it's about being human. And I love what I do. It's kind of like what I said before about feeling honored to be on people's journeys. I am passionate about what I do. I mean, I was vice president of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. I had 7 weeks of vacation a year. I had bonuses that were probably equivalent to some people's annual earnings. And I resigned that. I let that go. And I went back and got my license and I started back into therapy because that's what my calling is. So this is going to sound cliche, but please love what you do. I mean, if you don't love what you do something different. But I love what I do. And I think that is what comes across as that safety for people because I'm not doing it for a buck, really. I mean, I'm doing it because I love it. And I always, in podcasts, I've talked about this before, but my motivation is really legacy. When I worked in the corporate world, I worked for a big development company who develops huge properties all over the world. In Denver, your listeners are from Denver. We redid Denver Union Station, probably 10 years ago or something. And it's a completely different place than it was. And I can remember in that situation, people talking about, look at this legacy. After you're dead, there's going to be Union Station. And I thought, that's cool, kind of. But that wasn't the legacy I wanted, right? And as a therapist, what I know is that if I'm working with an individual or a couple or whatever, and I can help them with their own challenges, their own trauma, if I can help a couple become better at communicating, they become better parents, their kids become better, better raised kids. And what I always talk about my legacy is 3 generations down the road after I'm dead and in the grave, some great grandkids of my clients are going to be living a better life because of what I was able to help there. And of course, the client is the one that does the work, not me. But if I can help shine a light so that they can make those improvements, that has drastic change on the world. To me, that's a legacy. So I guess what I'm saying in a long about way is I think that the safety that people feel around me is a genuineness. It's just a love for my clients and for what I do. So please be that, and if you can't be that, no problem. Do something different with your life, right?
Yeah. I wasn't planning to go here, and we can edit this out if you would like, but I can feel my soul being stirred as you speak, and I know other people who are listening will feel the same. You made a slight mention of you're not in it for the money. And at the same time, I would love for you to maybe talk a little bit about charging, because there are so many people in this industry who are not in it for the money. I love hypnotists because they're the most open-hearted people I've been around as a group, as a whole. And I think so many people are afraid to charge because they're doing it out of love. And so they're afraid to charge.
Yeah, I have lots of things to say about that actually. Just because I love what I do doesn't mean that I undervalue what I do. And I believe that when you have the privileges that I have come to in my life, that there is a moral and ethical obligation to give back. I think that's important. But what I learned in my early years as a therapist back in the 90s is that for me anyway, it makes sense to give back outside of what I do for a living. And that may not fit for everyone. But for me, I'm a clinical supervisor and a graduate instructor at CSU, Colorado State University. So I train therapists behind the one-way mirror, and I'm AAMFT approved supervisor, which is a national credential. But I actually, they paid me for a semester to do that, but mostly I do it for volunteer. So I volunteer to go in there again because I'm passionate about it. I love teaching. I love the relationships with the student therapists, and they take Medicaid, they take Medicare. It's very low cost for people to go to that clinic, and it's an awesome clinic with, you might have a therapist in front that's, brand new being a therapist, but behind the one-way mirror, you've got me and Tony and some other supervisors. We probably have 60 or 70 years of experience behind the mirror. So that's how I give back. That's one of the ways I give back. Another way, I've been volunteering for the city of Loveland. I've been the chair of the Loveland Communication Advisory Board for probably 7 years. I give back in that way. But when it comes to what I do, I value what I do. And it's important because if you don't value what you do, the people you do it for won't value it. And if the people who you do it for don't value it, they won't change, right? And therapy and hypnotism, hypnotherapy, coaching, this is all about change, right? I always ask clients when they come in, have you had therapy before? Have you had coaching before? Yes, I have. How was it? It was great. The guy was really nice. He really listened to me. I really felt supported. I thought he was a great guy. And I go, so what fundamentally changed in your life in that experience? And they go, um, I don't know that anything really changed, right? And I go, okay, that's not therapy. That's not coaching. I'm not saying it's not beneficial. It's very beneficial to have someone listen, but that's not therapy. It's about change. So if people aren't changing, that's not therapy. So when you undervalue your own work, you attract clients who undervalue what you do. And when they undervalue what you do, they don't invest in the same way, and therefore they don't change. I can remember earlier in my career working at a clinic, and we did a lot of sliding fee scale stuff. That's not something that works for me, because what I discovered was you could take the sliding fee scale and you could take the progress of the clients, and there was almost a direct correlation. And I would see other therapists, I was supervising actually at this point too. I'd see therapists come in, they do a beautiful session with a person. And at the end, the person would go, oh yeah, and I did pay you. And they'd like reach in their pockets and they'd pull out some quarters and like, here's a $1 bill. And they'd pay their $3.50. And of course, this was in the early 90s, right? And then they would not change. And there are people who need help who don't have money. That's not what I'm saying. And that's why, that's why I volunteer. But I don't make my money based on that. I make my money. I don't accept insurance. Back in the late 90s, early 2000s, I was on all of the insurance panels. And when managed care came in, it just became an ethical nightmare for me. I don't like people's privacy, and confidentiality goes out the window. You have to diagnose people. You have to come up with a diagnosis that the insurance company agrees to. There's all of these games that I didn't like. So I quit taking insurance in about the year 2000. And so I only have private pay clients. And I charge what I believe to be what I'm worth. So
it's not cheap. And I think that's really, I have invested thousands of dollars with you, and it's the most worthwhile investment I've ever made. And I'm so happy that I asked this question because I'm hoping that light bulbs are coming on for some people listening.
Yeah.
I really do think that the change that a person receives is directly correlated with the skin they have in the game.
Yes. And I do get that the skin they have in the game is relative. If you
Right.
have someone on Medicaid and they can barely come up with a $50 copay, but they're coming to therapy and they're paying their $50 copay, that's, to me, that's great. They probably are going to change. They're going to have all kinds of benefits. But if they could afford $100 and they come in and they pay you the $10 copay, the likelihood that they're going to really improve just goes down.
Right. The next thing I would like to discuss, you had mentioned that before you and I had our last session, you had a ketamine session with someone. And I will just say right here, because I know it's going to come out at some point, the session that I had with you following that was also a ketamine session. And those sessions are radically changing my life. It's just astonishing what a beautiful transformation I've experienced just after 2 sessions with you. Will you talk to me a little bit about ketamine, why you choose to use it with your clients, and how it has created transformation for them?
Sure. Originally, it was an anesthesia drug. It's been around forever. It's been legal in the United States forever. It's considered by the World Health Organization to be the safest anesthesia drug on the planet. It doesn't interact with hardly any other medications. It doesn't repress respiration. So if you have a kid and you're at the ER because they got a crayon stuck in their eardrum, the first thing they're going to do is give ketamine because it's safe, it's reliable, it's predictable. So you have these institutions, mental institutions, with people who were severely depressed and massively suicidal, and they would go off to get knee surgery or shoulder surgery or whatever. And they would come back, and people started noticing these people would come back from surgery and their suicidality was gone, like magically gone. And in the past, the only way we had to produce that kind of thing was electroconvulsive shock therapy, which of course people always cringe at. Really, electroconvulsive shock therapy was life-saving because when you have an institution, you have someone who literally are so suicidal that if you leave them alone for 20 minutes, they're going to be dead. You could do electroconvulsive shock therapy, and magically they'd come out of that experience and their suicidality was gone. It was a life-saving technology, but they started noticing that ketamine had the same effect. So anesthesiologists started looking into the antidepressive elements of ketamine and realized that it was having the same effect. So you started to have these places get stood up, sometimes a lot of times by anesthesiologists, with the idea to help people with massive depression for whom other medications didn't work. You would go in and they would hook you up to an IV and they would blast you to the moon and the stars and God, and hopefully you would come back without the suicidal ideation. And to them, the sort of psychedelic elements of ketamine were a side effect that they've been trying to get rid of and haven't done so successfully. But then you had therapists in the mental health field who started going, wait a minute, we're missing something big here, because all of the other antidepressants, the SSRIs, the SNRIs, are all symptom reducers. They don't heal depression, they relieve the symptoms, which means it doesn't mean that they're not useful, right? Because if I have a person who is really depressed, they're not sleeping well, their appetite is messed up, they are hopeless, they have brain fog, they have low energy, they have low motivation. All of those things are what keep them from climbing out of depression, right? If you have low motivation and no hope that it's going to help and you're not sleeping well, it's really hard to dig yourself out of a depression. So the idea is you take an SSRI and it helps with all of those symptoms. And now you go to therapy, and therapy is what heals the depression. The SSRI, the Paxil, the Prozac, the Zoloft, they don't cure, they just deal with the symptoms. But with the symptoms alleviated, you can go do the work you need to do. And then you graduate from therapy, you get off the SSRIs, and you continue with your life. There are some people who have a chemical imbalance that they may be struggling with that their whole life, right? But that's a relatively small percentage of people. But in our society, everyone wants a fast fix. So they take the pills and they just stay on them. They don't go to therapy. They just stay on the pills. And of course, the pharmaceutical industry is happy to do that because they're making money dealing the pills out. So when you have people who don't respond to SSRIs, there was nothing else you could do, really. Now, all of a sudden, you realize that ketamine, which instead of operating in the serotonin and norepinephrine parts of the brain or chemicals of the brain like the SSRIs do, it works in the GABAergic system. It's a completely different system. So now all of a sudden, people who've had lifelong depression where SSRIs and therapy didn't help, there was hope for them. But kind of blasting them off to God and the stars may or may not be the help that they needed. And so people started doing what I do, which is low dose ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. You're doing therapy when you're on the ketamine. And there are a lot of benefits to ketamine that I'm just going to cover them really quickly for time. But like hypnosis, ketamine quiets down the prefrontal cortex. And that's actually why I started using ketamine. It quiets down the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that I equate to like being the naysayer in a brainstorming situation. It's the person who's saying, well, we don't have money for that, and we can't do that, and we don't have time for that, right? They're shooting down all the ideas, and you're like, well, you just quiet down so we can have some creative thought here, right? So ketamine quiets that down. And if you do that while you're doing a therapy session, the person has an opportunity to see themselves in a different light. They can be more creative. They're less defensive. And that part of their brain that's always telling me, you suck and you're never going to be anything, all that kind of recorded BS we have that our prefrontal cortex spews at us all the time gets quieted down so they can actually have new insights. That's the first reason why I use ketamine during psychotherapy. The second reason is the default mode network. And I know you know this, Lori, but a lot of people, your listeners might not. The default mode network is 3 areas of your brain that get wired together when you're growing up. And they become your default way of being in the world. So if you can think of your self-esteem, your way of looking at yourself, your ideas about how you fit in the world, the way you have self-talk, the way you communicate with other people, the way you approach relationships, all of that stuff is in your default mode network. So when you go into talk therapy, you can take years to kind of rearrange with CBT and some other things. I use CBT. That part of the brain is so wired that you walk out of the session and then you're in the real world and a situation presents itself. And guess what? You go back to that unconscious default mode network. But what ketamine does is it softens the default mode network for 72 hours after you take it. So you come into therapy, you got the prefrontal cortex quieted down, you have all kinds of different ways of looking at yourself that are more helpful, that are more positive. And then you go home and you journal and you listen to music and you go for a walk in nature for the next couple of days and you let all that percolate so that when you come out of that 72 hours, your default mode network is now rearranged. Mm-hmm. So you actually keep those changes. Whereas in typical talk therapy, it might take years really to get those changes to stick. Third thing is that ketamine gives people, technically it is a dissociative. So it gives people, if you think about it in hypnosis, when you go in and you're doing trauma work, right? And you go in and you have them sit in a movie theater, right? You imagine them sitting in a movie theater and they're looking up at the screen. And then you have them imagine lifting out of their own body and coming behind the projector screen. And they're looking at themselves in the movie theater, watching the screen, and then you can control what's on the screen, right? That gives protection from trauma. It gives disassociation. Ketamine gives a similar kind of dissociation so that when people come upon really, really hard, scary stuff that in talk therapy they would not even touch with a 10-foot pole. And you say, I give this example a lot, you say, hey, do you want to go into this deep, dark hole and pit in the middle of your stomach, or do you want to go back to the beach and listen to the waves? And clients always say, let's go into it. So they have this courage, this buffer that allows them to go into it, but it doesn't stop their emotions. People still cry, people still get angry, people still have emotions in a ketamine therapy session, but they're not afraid of them, which really allows for people to have a catharsis. So that's the third thing. And then the fourth thing, last but absolutely not least, is that ketamine is neurogenetic. There are a few substances on this planet that are neurogenetic, not many of them. Ketamine is one of them. And what that means is that I can do a brain scan of someone with chronic anxiety or chronic depression before we do ketamine therapy, and I will see parts of their brain that are atrophying and dying off. And after a ketamine session, we can do a brain scan and you see those nerves healing themselves, and you also see those nerves reaching out to other parts of the brain. So it is chemically, physically healing, not just symptom reduction.
That is so amazing. And as you were speaking, there were so many places where I wanted to jump in and say, this is, but it's like, Paul, when you talk about the I can't remember what you called it, but the critical analytical part of the brain essentially being, muted,
Prefrontal cortex.
the prefrontal cortex. Would
Yeah.
you I have called that the critical faculty for the hypnotists that are listening and are familiar with what that term means. Would you agree that that's what's happening, is that the critical faculty is essentially being set aside, which is the objective of a hypnosis session?
Yes. So this is how I got to doing ketamine therapy. Is for 30 years I was doing hypnosis, and my style of hypnosis is not super interactive, because even if you use idiomotor signaling and that kind of stuff, if you're asking your client lots of questions, they're going to go to their conscious mind for the answer, which brings them out of the trance. And so I thought, if my client and I are both working really hard to keep this trance in place, mostly I'm talking and they're listening. But I thought, how more dynamic could it be if they could stay in a trance and we could actually have a dynamic interactive dialogue? That's when the ketamine came. I thought, dang, if ketamine does the same thing, because you've experienced it and you give your opinion. I've experienced ketamine therapy myself as part of my training, and to me, it feels like a really good hypnotic trance. And once I noticed that, I thought, dang, what if the ketamine manages the trance? I don't have to worry about that. Now, me and the client can actually have a more dynamic session.
Yes, and it was so beautiful for me because in our first ketamine session, you brought me in with an induction, and then at the end you brought me out with a hypnosis protocol. And I remember as you were speaking, everything you said, it was like, yes, this is true. This is really happening. And I thought, this is what those people up on stage who bark like dogs and cluck like chickens, this is what they're experiencing. And I, as a super analytical person, have never experienced that. So it's been so beautiful for me to experience what it's like to be in hypnosis with someone that I trust, with that critical faculty quieted. And that's actually something that I experienced even before ketamine with you. I think probably because of the modalities you were explaining at the start, but it's just a beautiful thing. And I would love to, you can let me know how you feel about it at some point if you would like to do a part two. I have more questions and more things we could talk about. But is there anything else that you want to add or go into detail with before we say goodbye today?
So I'm pioneering something called hypnosomatic KAP. KAP is ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. I was trained in somatic KAP, and if you're familiar with The Body Keeps the Score, the book by Bessel van der Kolk, the idea is that people store trauma and things in their body. And so when I'm doing ketamine therapy, I will have people scan their body and say, what are you noticing? And they say, well, I don't know, nothing. My right hand feels numb. And to me, all of that has a meaning. You and I have talked about this, right? There's all kinds of symbolism there, right? Our right versus left, and our feet are what carry us forward in life, and our hands are what help us manipulate things in life. There's all of these things. And so none of that is actually usually meaningless. So that's the somatic part. And when people say, hey, I just see this big, huge black pit in the middle of my stomach, then I say, do you want to go? Let's go into that. What would it be like for you to go closer to that? And normally in talk therapy, they'd go, I'm not doing that. In ketamine, they're more likely to go, yeah, let's dig into it. So that's the somatic element. But there's also research that indicates that when people are coming out of a ketamine trance, they are in a highly suggestive state, just like you would be with hypnosis. So I thought, okay, there's two reasons I use hypnosis. One is like with you, I did an induction because ketamine impacts people in different ways and at different speeds. So someone might take the ketamine, and the idea is their prefrontal cortex is quieting down while the medicine is taking effect. For some people, their prefrontal cortex is not quieted down yet, and they start to notice the effects of the medicine, and it freaks them out a little bit, especially if they don't have any experience with psychedelics and things, right? So they actually get anxious. And I don't know, you're smiling, so I'm wondering if that was your experience.
The first time it was a little like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why we did the induction the second time, because while I'm doing an induction, I'm helping you relax while the ketamine is kicking in. So your prefrontal cortex is already coming down from hypnosis, and your mind isn't sitting there thinking, spinning, going, why am I taking this medicine? This is crazy. And I don't know if this is right. Or instead, you're right. So that's why I do the induction. And then at the end, you probably noticed I picked out themes during the ketamine session, which was really just dialogue back and forth with you and I. I picked out the themes, threw them into a metaphor. So then at the end, as you're coming out of the ketamine trance, I can spin a metaphor. I don't have to do an induction. I don't have to do a deepener. I just weave a metaphor. I say, hey, let me tell you a story. And you were like, sure. And so I told you a story. But that story was designed to bring together all of the things that you had already just experienced in the ketamine session. So to me, that's just a really strong reinforcement.
I want to take a quick minute to say for anyone listening, I acquired a prescription for the ketamine that I take, and it's a beautiful experience for me. When Paul talks about it being somatic, it's like I'm having this experience in my body that is just unlike anything I've encountered before. And one of the most beautiful things that has come out of it for me is a deep sense of self-love. Just I have tried to love myself for a very long time, and I've definitely made progress. But having those two experiences, and they're about 40 minutes to an hour, just that short experience has opened the doors for me and has generated a beautiful self-love that I've never had before. And so I just want to say, if you have a way of obtaining ketamine and you're thinking about doing it on your own, I don't think you're going to get the same benefit. I highly encourage you to do it in the care of someone who is trained in this way, because as I'm sitting there, I'm telling Paul what I'm experiencing, and then we unpack it in a reintegration session within 72 hours. And so like that's where so much of the therapeutic benefit comes in.
Yeah, I would actually like to reinforce that with a public service announcement. There are places out there online where you can sign up and you see a doctor for a few minutes and they ship ketamine to your house. I'm not big into regulation in general, but there are some things that should be regulated. My concern is we're gonna have someone's gonna die, someone's going to overdose, someone's going to take, there are certain things that ketamine is counterproductive in, right? If you have someone who's schizophrenic, you have someone who's in a manic phase of bipolar, you don't want them taking ketamine. And so we're going to have an incident, and then that's going to hit the front pages of the news. And then all of the positive things. I felt like this with hypnosis for a long time because people are always like, oh, your hypnosis, isn't that hoodoo guru stuff? Isn't that weird? Like, isn't that like weird zombie stuff or whatever, right? And all it takes is one negative incident to hit the news, and then everyone goes, wow, this is dangerous and scary. And so my concern is that that is going to happen with someone who's just, they get shipped 2 months supply of ketamine for ketamine therapy, and they just decide to take half of it at home because that seems like that'd be a cool thing to do. It is a dangerous, this is a scheduled, controlled substance. This is not to be taken lightly. And the prescribers, I work with 6 or 7 different prescribers, and they do not prescribe to people who are not going to therapy. They don't prescribe and say, hey, take this home and hang out with your spouse and see how it works. So I know I'm probably coming across really strong, but something as positive and helpful for this is a breakthrough medication. And the last thing I want to see is something plastered all over the front pages because of these companies that are just out there mailing ketamine to people's houses. I think it's a really bad idea.
I'm grateful you said that. And I think it's important to come across strongly because I think it's a very important point. And if someone was interested and they live far, far away, are there ways that a person can look for someone that does what you do?
Yes, what they're looking for is psycholytic instead of psychedelic. Psycholytic is low dose ketamine. So you want psycholytic ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. Ketamine therapy, that term is typically used for go in and get an IV and they blast you to the moon and stars. And again, I'm not saying that that's not useful. If someone is actively suicidal and nothing else works, that could be very beneficial. But for the vast majority of people who are dealing with a long-term anxiety or a long-term depression, or they're trying to get through a PTSD incident and get to the other side of that, blasting them to the moon and stars with no therapeutic support is not necessarily what I think is a good answer.
Paul, I'm so grateful to have had this conversation with you. I think both of us have tons more ideas of what we could share. I would love to do a part 2 in the future, but before we say goodbye, is there anything else you want to add to the conversation, or do you feel complete with that?
I think I'm complete for now. Like you said, I
Okay.
could keep talking and I'd love to do a part 2.
Okay.
For now, I think we've covered a lot.
Okay. And I will put contact details wherever in the show notes, wherever you're listening or watching. Is there anything you'd like to say audibly for people to get in touch with you if they want to discuss more?
Sure, yeah. You can go to my webpage, which is cohesivesolutions.com. And solutions is spelled creatively. It's SOUL. So create or cohesivesolutions.com. You can look me up on Facebook on Cohesive Solutions as well. I also have cohesive coaching, which is more along the lines of executive leadership coaching. I coach Olympic athletes and professional athletes. I do a lot of hypnosis around that kind of performance. So yeah, any of those places.
Okay. I feel really lucky to have had this conversation with you. I just have to tell you, I feel so grateful to be able to experience therapy slash coaching with you. It's just an absolute privilege and an honor. And you are leaving a legacy for my family. I know that my grandbabies will be raised differently because of the impact you've had on my family and on people that are very dear to me. So thank you, Paul.
Thank you. That's why I do what I do. So I love hearing that.
Thank you for listening, my friend. Paul is passionate about giving back and equipping you to make ultra effective, transformational hypnosis audios. Go to paulsgift.com to get instant access to Paul's hypnosis audio cheat sheet that shows you how to create hypnotic recordings that change lives. That's paulsgift.com. PAULS, no apostrophe, gift.com. paulsgift.com. You can also discover how to connect with Paul in the notes where you're watching this podcast. Okay, now go to paulsgift.com and get your cheat sheet.